Dear colleagues, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yorgos Franzis. I am CALB's regional representative for the MENA region. And together with my colleague, Isabel Pelli, the global thematic expert on cash and basic needs of DG ECHO of the European Union, we would like to warmly welcome you to the launching event of the Good Practice Review and case studies, focusing on cash assistance in context of inflation and depreciation, which is developed collectively by the Donor Cash Forum and CALB. So quickly touching on our agenda, first we will highlight the objectives of this event and present our panelists. Then Isabel will take us through the Good Practice Review, shedding light on its most important elements. And then we will proceed with our panel discussion, where our panelists will present their experience and learnings drawn from the countries they work in, and then followed by a 20 minutes Q&A session. And in the end, we will wrap up where we can also briefly discuss how this initiative can be taken forward. So the objectives of this event is first to familiarize participants with the Good Practice Review and how it can inform decision-making. Second, to highlight the use and relevance of the review in context of inflation and depreciation. And as our panelists also will share their experiences about Yemen, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, and Afghanistan, and equip participants to use the Good Practice Review in their own context. Before Isabel takes us through the Good Practice Review contents, I would like to present and welcome one more time our panelists who kindly accepted our invitation to participate in this event. Now, first and foremost, I would like to welcome, a big welcome to Mrs. Najat Roshdi, the UN Deputy Special Coordinator, UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator for Lebanon. Mrs. Najat, a big welcome. Then we have Corina Kreidler, the outgoing humanitarian advisor of FCDO, focusing on Zimbabwe. Welcome, Corina. Then we have our dear Rabia Ahmed, the senior cash advisor deployed from CashCap to Yemen Cash and Market Group with OCHA. Welcome, Rabia. And last but not least, we have Mulugeda Handino, working currently at the WFP Asia Pacific Regional Office in Bangkok. And currently he's the co-lead of the Afghanistan Cash Working Group. Welcome, Mulu. So now it's time to give the floor to my colleague Isabel, who has been spearheading this initiative since the very beginning. And she will take us through the Good Practice Review. Isabel, thank you for all the work you've done, together with the rest of the team of the Donor Cash Forum. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Yorgos. Pleasure to be here with all of you today. So on behalf of the Donor Cash Forum, I'll be providing an overview of the Good Practice Review, taking you through some background and the process for its development, an overview of the contents of the document, and then some tips and tricks for using it and some emerging lessons learned. So in terms of background, this is really a critical issue for humanitarian cash assistance, given the growing challenge of inflation and currency depreciation in contexts in which cash assistance is being implemented or could be. And I think the number of us on this webinar today is a testament to this. So as donors, we really saw the need to document existing practice, and this was further underscored by COVID, which has exacerbated economic volatility in many humanitarian contexts. So why was this an initiative of the Donor Cash Forum? The document has been drafted collaboratively by donors, given our role in ensuring the optimal use of funds to meet humanitarian outcomes and in driving coherence and value for money among humanitarian actors. And so in addition to the Good Practice Review itself, which you can see there on the left-hand side of the screen, there are also 4 case studies which mirror the structure of the review. And these are Lebanon, Yemen, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And we have speakers from 3 of those contexts today, as well as I'm sure people on the line very familiar with South Sudan. The drafting of each case study was led on by a different donor within the Donor Cash Forum. And so particular thanks to Corina Kreidler, who's here today, from our ex-FCDO for Zimbabwe, Rosalind Mulot from DG ECHO and Anne Johnston from FCDO for the Lebanon case study, Maria Bernardez from DG ECHO, Stefan Bumbacher and Raphael Chodsky from the Swiss Development Cooperation for the South Sudan case study, and Karojo Di Gloria, DG ECHO from for the Yemen one, which was drafted in close collaboration with Rabia, who's here today. And I also want to say a particular thanks to Olivia Golden from FCDO, who's here today and was a huge help, particularly with the concept section. This was also a collaboration with the CALP network. So the content was sourced through a consultative process coordinated through CALP. And many of you on the line, I can see some names, and I know many of you have been involved either through cash working groups or in providing written feedback. And so all of you are warmly thanked, as are the CALP tag members who reviewed the document and the team who worked hard to copy, edit and publish the document. This has also been a partnership with the SPACE initiative, so Social Protection Approaches to COVID Expert Advice Helpline, a real mouthful, funded by FCDO and GIZ, and who specifically supported with the compilation and editing of the case studies. So particular thanks to Callum McLean and Emma Holden-Maillard for this. So now, thanks to Rover, into the substance. So why a good practice review and not a guidance? The reason we've called it that is because we see this really still as being an emerging challenge, and we're all collectively learning how to respond. So the document isn't prescriptive, but rather it's a compilation of practices, and it's really populated with many lessons learned and examples to bring this to life. And we really need to continue documenting practices in this area. So we intend for this document and its case studies to be updated as regularly as possible. And as mentioned by Yorgos, CALP will share their thinking on how to facilitate this. So starting with, the document really starts with some key concepts and their relevance to humanitarians. And it tries to do this in simple terms. So for those of us who are not macroeconomists, try and really digest what this concretely means. So the kinds of questions that the document answers is, what is inflation and what can its causes be, particularly in fragile contexts? What are the characteristics of hyperinflation and what additional challenges does it present? Why is hard currency important in such contexts? And what's the concept of dollarization, which I'm sure Ms. Rushdie will be touching upon shortly. Exchange rates, why and how can there be different types of exchange rates? What happens when these differ considerably? What has been done to negotiate preferable exchange rates for humanitarian action? What's depreciation? How does it differ from devaluation? And what implications might it have for humanitarian budgets? So once there's a steady grounding around those concepts, the document then goes into what are the implications for humanitarian assistance. And so it really provides answers to the three questions that you can see there on the screen. So just here are some headlines which I think are important as we go into this discussion. So whilst humanitarian assistance as a whole can really be impacted by inflation, cash assistance is particularly so because it reduces beneficiary purchasing power, while possibly also increasing the delivery cost of assistance. With depreciation, it's a bit trickier because for a fixed budget in a hard currency, humanitarian agencies can, in theory, have access to more local currency, so potentially continue to provide the same value of assistance. But what often occurs is that inflation and depreciation are happening in parallel, and then inflation outpaces the possible increases in transfer value that could be made because of the currency gains. And this simple diagram on the screen, which I must credit Hélène Juillard for, if she's on the line, tries to present this. So when this is the case, agencies can sometimes be locked into an official exchange rate which is lower than the parallel rate or the market rate, and this can really reduce the value of assistance. As many of you know, inflation and depreciation can also affect liquidity. This is something that's come out in many of the case studies. So these are just some of the challenges which are explored in the case studies and will be by our panelists today. So following the concepts and implications for humanitarian assistance, the Good Practice Review then guides users through a program cycle approach using the key headings of situation analysis, response analysis, and response options. So this is really the core of the document. And each case study is also structured around these headings. So the situation analysis section, which you can see on the far left, summarizes what you need to know about the context in relation to inflation and depreciation. And it has 3 steps: contextual analysis, preparatory actions, and programmatic analysis. And some detail under each, as you can see. And then based on the information acquired through the situation analysis, the response analysis section then summarizes the key information points to guide decision-making and identify the type of scenario that you're dealing with. And this helps users to assess the appropriateness and feasibility of different response options. So those key information points you can see on the screen are purchasing power, prices, preferences, protection risks, feasibility, and value for money. And we really insist on this process being repeated on an ongoing basis as part of ongoing continuous situation analysis. And then the response options are the outcome of the response analysis. The idea is that they can be considered at program design stage, as well as throughout program implementation, and they can be standalone or complementary. We really emphasize that this needs to be an iterative process. And these response options include advocacy, policy, and influencing, so on issues such as preferential exchange rates, the use of hard currency, the regulatory environment around digital transfers, etc. And then a number of programming options, such as increasing the purchasing power in the local currency, shifting from cash assistance to value or commodity vouchers, transferring assistance to beneficiaries in hard currency, or shifting to in-kind assistance fully or partially, as well as some complementary options related, for example, to negotiating with financial service providers. And all of these different response options will be touched on by our panelists. So across all of the above, an underlying principle of the guidance really is the importance of harmonized approaches between donors and implementing agencies, and involving a breadth of stakeholders, often more so than we're used to in humanitarian action. Coordination bodies, of course, the humanitarian country team or equivalent, the central government, central banks, and social protection actors to have a harmonized approach. So a couple of tips and tricks for how to use this good practice review. It's really intended to be as practical as possible. And with this in mind, we've got lots of icons and a set structure to help guide you through it. So the situation analysis section, for example, each step is structured according to these clear headings and their associated icons. Why is this important? What do you need to know or do? And what are the implications for different actors? And with the response options, they're then broken down also in a set way. So the scenario, what is the situation in terms of inflation and depreciation? The preconditions for that response option in terms of the type of analysis, the regulatory environment that needs to be in place, etc. Then what to do. This is really step-by-step guidance. What are the implications of this response option for humanitarian actors with a strong focus on risk mitigation strategies? What are the implications for the beneficiaries in terms of purchasing power, communication, protection, etc.? So in addition to the program cycle approach, the good practice review also has multiple examples, which are in dedicated pinkish boxes from a wide range of countries. So the 4 case study countries, as well as Turkey, Iraq, Venezuela, Nigeria, Northwest Syria, Sudan, Somalia, and Haiti, which I think really highlights the breadth of challenges, breadth of context, in which this is a challenge. And then lessons learned have also been documented across the case studies, and these are presented in dedicated blue text boxes. And just a few highlights of those. So one really is the importance of preparedness for appropriate and timely adjustments to programming. We all know this takes time, particularly collectively, and so having the triggers and thresholds in place is really key. Programmatic flexibility to be able to change between response options by implementers, of course, but donors as well. The role of advocacy with governments, with financial service providers and regulators as a fundamental enabler of some of these changes. And then finally, the value of harmonization of instruments and approaches amongst actors. So really emphasizing the need for this all to be done collectively. So hopefully that helps guide you through the document and pique your curiosity to explore it more. And I'm now going to transition to the panel who will share some more in-depth experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, for this very comprehensive presentation. Really good. The publication and the case studies can be found on CAP's website. And of course, there will be a follow-up email where you will receive the link, but you can easily navigate in our website and find those ones in a specific section of our website. And now it's time to move with our panel discussion that focuses on 4 different country contexts, namely the ones of Lebanon, Zimbabwe, Yemen, and Afghanistan. So first, I would like to open the panel discussion with our esteemed guest, Mrs. Najat Roshdi, the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Lebanon. Mrs. Roshdi arrived to Lebanon just 2 days before the tragic event of the Beirut blast took place, and instantly began leading a coordinated emergency response in a country that, as many of us know, has been suffering from an already rapidly deteriorating microeconomic crisis. Dear Mrs. Najat, welcome once again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Georgios, and thank you very much, Isabel, for setting the stage. I think it makes it much easier for all of us. And as you said, I had a really baptism by fire, when I arrived to Lebanon, and where I had actually to manage the emergency right after the explosion of the port of Beirut, which, as you know, was the 3rd most important explosion worldwide. The economic, financial, and social context is very well carved out in the Lebanon case study paper, and I really would like to congratulate you on that. I was really impressed and very much interested just going through it, and I was happy that what we have done here made sense, and to try and to find actually and to realize that was very much actually the methodology and the approach you were suggesting, and I really commend you for all the amazing work you have done. But just to contextualize it for Lebanon, so the key issues at stake in Lebanon, which will explain why we had to go through that. First of all, Lebanon was and is still, unfortunately, under exceptional macro-financial duress, with the Lebanese pound having lost close to 90% of its value. A rapidly evolving depreciation inflation spiral. Inflation rates have exceeded 100% year over year for 12 consecutive months, with food and non-alcoholic beverage, which account for the bulk of poor households' expenditures, witnessing a staggering 253% annual average inflation rate in 2020. A steep contraction of the economy, translating into limited income generating activities and competition over limited resources. To put matters in perspective, the minimum wage in Lebanon is currently equivalent to a mere, $35 per month. Acute and often a complete disruption to very basic public services, provision of electricity, water, healthcare, to the point where we had, as humanitarian, to deliver fuel to hospitals, primary healthcare centers, and water pumps as a life-saving activity. And the socio-economic challenges in the country have compounded with an acute, of course, electricity and energy crisis owing to the decrease and gradual withdrawal of fuel subsidies. Close to 20% of the population is comprised of refugee population, falling deeper into extreme poverty. And actually the latest assessment is showing that more than 90% of the Syrian refugees are extremely poor, and they are really hugely impacted, of course, by the crisis. And while Lebanese households are also faced with largely deteriorating purchasing power and inadequate safety nets, and no social protection framework to support them through this unprecedented crisis. I can go on and on and on with all those indicators, but I think you all know very much about the situation in Lebanon. And actually all the indicators are really red, really red, and it is deteriorating by the day. And in this context, the humanitarian and development community is consumed, of course, with finding adequate solution for preserving value for money in the context of a multiple exchange rate system, which actually is not new, but 2 years ago it was 1,500, and then they came up with the second exchange rate, and they added to that. They kept adding and coming up with new exchange rates in a totally untransparent way, obviously, and with only one reason is to protect somehow the shareholders in the banking system, and to ensuring that humanitarian and development assistance reaches their intended beneficiaries and are not transferred to the financial sector. And obviously, when you have so many exchange rates, you can be sure that a lot of it goes to the financial sector. And 3, ensuring that assistance packages are adequate in satisfying basic needs. 4th, ensuring harmonization and coherence of cash assistance programs across all operational response plans, as this is fundamental to ensure that the collective intervention of the aid community in Lebanon is conflict sensitive and equitable, in line with the principles of accountability towards the populations we serve. And this came with a lot of challenges, and we really had to come up with a solution. And actually that started immediately right after the Beirut blast response. Among the first orders of business was to coordinate and organize, of course, the response to the Beirut blast. So it's aimed at a rollout of an emergency relief and cash assistance, which is always the case after a sudden disaster, to vulnerable households affected by the blast, in an active effort actually to restore their dwellings and to restrict the erosion of their living standards. For all cash programs across all sectors of intervention of this response, I established as humanitarian coordinator an emergency cash task force to harmonize, coordinate, and ensure no duplication across cash programs in different sectors. The membership of this cash task force, it was not only the UN agencies, but also the NGOs, the donors, the donor community, and really across the sectors, because it was really important that we all come up with this strategy, and that we commit to it for many reasons, obviously. And we needed most actually to make sure that there is no duplication, and obviously that there was a clear coordination. The cash task force was very much a successful collaborative effort across all agencies, organizations, and donors groups. As humanitarian coordinator, I issued guidance to all agencies and organizations, allowing them to roll out their cash programs in dollars, because that was the only way to do it, since there was already 3 different exchange rates. And we discussed those guidance, we agreed on them, and we adopted them. I did that, though, in consultation with the Deputy Prime Minister, who was in charge of the response by that time, because we did not want to create any distortion or whatever problem that the country really did not need. This was to avoid actually organizations, agencies being stuck with a lower exchange rate for their dollars fund in the context of multiple exchange rate system, thereby losing a substantial amount of the real value of contributions coming in for beneficiaries. And I can give you a very simple example, but that time there were 2 exchange rates, one 1,500 and the other one 3,900, while the market exchange rate was almost 8,000 lira for $1. So you imagine the difference. I mean, more than 60% to 70% of the value was going to the banks. So this decision was unprecedented, and it was the very first time cash assistance was disbursed in US dollars. As many of you know, Lebanon operates in a dual currency system, or used to operate when they had dollars. They used to operate in a dual currency system, and it is absolutely legal to disburse in USD. That being said, the absolute priority across all sectors and activities remain to harmonize and align transfer values within each sector activity, regardless of the currency of disbursement, in adherence with the do no harm principles. Following the promising experience of disbursing in USD in the Beirut blast response, there was a need for a more in-depth and systematic analysis of the currency of disbursement across all response frameworks, and not just the Beirut blast. That out of accountability, of course, to the population we serve, but also out of accountability to the taxpayers who actually are transferring money with the clear objective that that should benefit, go directly to the beneficiaries, and again, not to the banks or the financial system. So the humanitarian country team, under my leadership, tasked the cash task force to conduct a value for money economic and risk analysis for all humanitarian and development assistance to Lebanon. And while humanitarian funding to Lebanon is transferred in foreign currency, a large share of this funding is converted to national currency at the level of each organization's financial service provider. As humanitarian organizations only had access to either the official exchange rate of 1,500 or the banking platform rate of 3,900 for $1, that is well below market's value. Humanitarian organizations had been gradually losing increased shares of their USD donor contribution to the financial sector. Essentially, as the market exchange rate continuously deteriorated in 2020, the share of humanitarian contribution loss gradually increased from 10% in contribution in October 2019 to 50% starting 2020. Dollar-dominated contribution entrusted to humanitarian organizations did not realize their full value for money and were not being used for their intended purpose, which is obviously to assist the most vulnerable. Humanitarian and development fund not realizing their full value translates to a significant loss to beneficiaries. This also led to less value and impact for donor funding, which raises concerns of effectiveness and accountability towards taxpayers in donors' countries and poses legal risks and political consequences. Finally, recapitalizing the impaired financial sector or the hard currency reserves of the central bank represent a substantial reputational risk for humanitarian and donors alike. Following the analysis and close collaboration with the donor community and the World Bank on the analysis, the HCT endorsed support for a hybrid system that will best allow humanitarian actors to serve and protect beneficiaries. The hybrid system entailed dollarizing all direct humanitarian cash assistance programs, except for those programs where it's not possible, including programs channeled through government institutions. The decision to dollarize humanitarian cash assistance guaranteed full value for money and guaranteed that full resources are transferred to beneficiaries, translating into much needed expanded caseloads and program coverage. Dollarization could also support macroeconomic stability in temporarily helping to assuage exchange rate fluctuations and consequent inflationary pressures. We have since then communicated the decision to the relevant authorities as United Nations, World Bank, and European Union on behalf of all the donors, and we are following up with the authorities on a systematic exchange rate framework for all non-dollarizable programs. The HCT has also endorsed a well-carved out risk and mitigation measures analysis, as it is absolutely crucial to counter possible operational and protection risk in a timely and diligent manner, especially that a sizable amount of assistance is targeting Syrian refugees population, and it is our duty to ensure do no harm approach when they access dollar-denominated entitlements. The dollarization of humanitarian assistance will also follow a phased implementation approach, whereby a formal assessment will be conducted between phase 1 and phase 2 to take stock of the lessons learned and improve implementation. It is important to note that assistance strictly targeting Syrian refugees will only be dollarized in a second phase following the launch of the World Bank ESSN that is meant to assist more than 150,000 Lebanese vulnerable households, and that will also be disbursed in USD as we try to contain the perception of aid bias and ensure that Lebanese households are also supported adequately. So your analysis is obviously very welcome and crucial exercise to instill a culture of learning across different contexts, and is highly informative tool in times of crisis. And I can tell you, I would have been the happiest humanitarian coordinator if your report was issued like 7 months or 8 months ago, because for sure, I would have saved a lot of time and energy, but it's always very, very useful, obviously. That's obviously without undermining the importance of an in-depth understanding of the specificities of each context. Many of the key issues faced in different contexts remain similar and can be informed by well-documented experiences of challenges, policies adopted, and lessons learned. We do believe here as humanitarian and development actors in Lebanon that such documents should definitely be a live document. It cannot be just a report, because the kind of context we are operating in is changing and evolving very quickly, and therefore adapting and being flexible is also a requirement. And obviously you have to reflect that in the document, obviously. And I can assure you that we'll be very happy to assist in constantly updating the Lebanon case study as it evolves. For us, you know, despite all the challenges, there were things that really helped us really move ahead and make the breakthrough. And this is really the collectiveness and the unified position of all the community, you know, the donor community, the humanitarian community, the development actors, and the culture of collective responsibility as well, and collective accountability, and therefore collective decision-making in tackling the most pressing challenges across humanitarian and development actors. I have also been actively coordinating with the donor community and have involved the donor community in all analytical products, negotiation and coordination efforts, and just having this unified position with a collective narrative has really helped us a lot in actually our political negotiation with the government and with the central bank to get the market exchange rates, meaning the best exchange rates possible, which, by the way, is not an official exchange rate. It is an exchange rate that we are provided with, but there is not a single document, actually official document, that is saying this is an exchange rate that exists. This is welcome to Lebanon. So if I have recommendation, you know, on behalf of the team in Lebanon, I will say that for other contexts would be to never be afraid to change the status quo. Yes, it can be very difficult, and yes, it is very politically sensitive, and yes, it can seem to be a mountain, but we have to do it. We really need to do it. We need to do it because we owe that to the beneficiaries. We owe that to the people who are really suffering from the situation, but also we owe that to the taxpayers. And we do, sometimes as international organization, we have the inclination not to change up the system, but no, we need to try. And that's really a duty. And it's part of our duty vis-a-vis the people who are suffering and vis-a-vis the people we need to support. In such context, flexibility and agility is really the name of the game. It's really important. It's important to be ready actually to change the course of action according, you know, to whatever is happening. But nobody should be afraid actually of going ahead and doing it. And I think that the case studies you are bringing can be used also as a benchmark or as a case study or as a reference whenever someone is getting into this kind of negotiation. And actually, if we maintain the status quo, it means that ourselves, we are taxing the population who are already taxed by the situation, who are already taxed by the lack of action of their governments and so on. Finally, another recommendation would be that whenever programmatic challenges are dire, always go back to finding a solution centered around the people and for the people, and which should be felt by the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rushdie, for such an elaborate description of your efforts and experiences. Truly, now, like, your participation in this event is highly valuable, and honestly, it allows us to understand the leadership elements that are required to lead such a complex response. I also take note that you know, the emphasis you put on the need for enhanced coordination and the necessity from program adaptations when needed across with the benefits of cross-learning and information sharing are well noted. Just before I move to the next panelist, Mrs. Rushdie, I know that you have to leave soon. Thank you for your participation. There are already quite a few, there is a lot of interest from the audience, and there are quite a few questions and comments in it. We need to move on because we are running out of time. I would be grateful if we can already start answering some of the questions there, along with your economists that I know that are participating, so we can move on and so we can keep this event on time. So thank you once again, Mrs. Rushdie. Now, please allow me to move on and invite Corina Kreidler to share some insights from her experience in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Corina. It is well known to many of us that Zimbabwe is a country suffering from hyperinflation for decades now, due to various factors, including growing instability, growing political instability, several years of drought, and recently the COVID restrictions. So, Corina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yorgos. Thank you, Isabel and Kalp and Echo, to giving me the opportunity to give some insights from the work that FCDO has funded in Zimbabwe. And even though you might think that Lebanon and Zimbabwe don't share so many characteristics, actually, you will hear a lot of repetition, because a lot of the elements that Najat described that influenced the decision making in Lebanon are also present in Zimbabwe. I would just want to highlight that because we have worked on this particularly in 2020 and 2021, so COVID, of course, was an additional important factor, because whilst traditionally humanitarian aid in Zimbabwe has rather focused on rural areas, and Yorgos mentioned so several years of drought, the COVID pandemic, the movement restrictions, several rounds of lockdowns have had a significant toll, especially on informal sector workers, many of them women, in urban areas. And therefore, the focus shifted quite significantly towards the urban environment. We can sort of see very similar macroeconomic challenges, though the inflation rates in Zimbabwe actually even tops the one in Lebanon. So at the height in July last year, it was 838% year-on-year inflation. Really very, very significant numbers. Similar to Lebanon, so we had an official exchange rate pegged at 25 Zim dollars to the US dollar, at the same time as the parallel exchange rates had gone well beyond 80. We've also seen, due to that situation, tiered pricing systems. So depending on what currency you had, whether it was cash or electronic money, you paid a different price in the shops and the supermarkets. We also had an arbitrary regulatory environment there. So the Zimbabwean government has gone through several iterations of allowing the dollar, banning the dollar, reintroducing the dollar again. And similar e-money was regulated in various iterations. And we also have a significant cash liquidity, and that not only refers to US dollars, but that even the local currency is not available. So Zimbabwean citizens are allowed to withdraw a maximum of 11 US dollars per week. So you can imagine with that amount of or restricted amount of cash, there is not that much that you can do. In terms of humanitarian programs, there's mainly a very, very large WFP-led urban program. So a total of 326,000 people are being assisted. In rural areas, because of all these challenges, WFP had shifted already end of 2019 back to in-kind support. And there are also a number of NGO and Red Cross cash programs, however, and also implemented in rural areas at a much smaller scale. So what programmatic and policy decisions have resulted from this situation? Well, first of all, whilst initially the urban program was just a pilot program, because of the COVID impact and because of the continuous very, very high need in urban areas, we continued it also beyond its initial duration. And with a very good harvest in spring 2021, the support to rural areas could mostly end, while the report in urban areas is still ongoing. We have also then had a situation that, so the first phase of the urban cash program with 100,000 beneficiaries had used e-money, Econet, EcoCash mobile platforms. And we saw, and I'll talk to that in more detail in a minute, a significant loss of purchasing power. But still that modality was being used. And then all of a sudden, literally overnight, end of June 2020, the government banned the use of bulk SMS money. So there was no other choice but to end this modality and to switch. And as a result, WFP mostly moved to the use of e-vouchers. So 2/3 of the 326,000 people get e-vouchers either through Scope, so WFP's own system, or through Red Rose. And 1/3 of the people get actual cash through Western Union mostly. And from the FCDO side, that actually involved quite a policy shift, because many of you will know that we strongly prefer cash over vouchers. However, because of the situation in Zimbabwe and also the clear preferences, especially by women, to receive the vouchers, we accepted, and we were totally on board with WFP that putting the majority of the caseloads on vouchers was the right decision. So how could the GPR guidance have helped us navigating all these decisions and having all these discussions? As the review very, very well shows, there is not one size fits all, and it really helps the user to go step by step through the context that is present in his or her country. However, as already these introductory remarks also show, there are a number of similarities actually across very different countries. And personally, for me, in this whole discussion, this was a wake-up moment when I shared with my FCDO colleagues in Lebanon, in Syria, in South Sudan. And I saw like, oh, really, we are facing very, very similar issues in very, very different countries. The guide will really help people to do a careful context analysis. There are a broad range of factors that need to be looked at. And they can be a little bit intimidating, especially to people who don't have a degree in economics. But it really, the review helps to do that also for the non-economists. In Zimbabwe, the cash working group was indeed a forum where we discussed this loss of purchasing power through the use of EcoCash. a number of meetings in a row, month after month, and participants regularly expressed their concerns. But what we didn't have were those triggers that the GPR recommends. And really, in hindsight, this would have been a very useful tool for us, because it was a little bit left in a limbo situation and kind of actually open to the tolerance of each agency with regards to the loss of purchasing power, because there was no systematic way of how to reach a collective decision to change course. And I quickly scribbled down what Naja just said: never be afraid to change the status quo. I think that lesson was very, very clearly there for us, because initially we were there were a number of actors quite hesitant to change the status quo. And it was in a way that that arbitrary or that regulatory decision by the government that forced everyone to change action. So in terms of the collective nature of these decisions, discussions, yes, we discussed it a lot, but there wasn't this collective sense of we really have to do this. We have to change action all together in the same direction. We also discussed it a lot amongst the donors, because we were, of course, concerned by the loss of purchasing power for the affected people, but also for value for money of the budgets that we had. And then what was really useful in terms of collective action was when the cash working group, after the ending of the use of EcoCash, was then used as a forum for presenting alternative financial service providers and their respective products. Because it was really a moment where actors needed to know and needed to broaden their experience with alternative options. And that for that, the cash working group was really, really helpful. And it also then later on led to negotiating common contracts and trying to get better terms and conditions by joining forces. And at the moment, the cash working group is in the ending stages of adopting a standard operating procedures. So the lessons that we've learned and the lessons that are incorporated in the GPR will also be put into these SOPs, and I think will guide then the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Corina, for sharing with us your insights and recommendations. I think what I take as a key takeaway is that we should thoroughly analyze the context from all angles before responding, and also seeking advice always from the experts, because microeconomics are not always the easiest topic. Also, your key messages regarding collective action, common approaches, including from the donor sides and decision-making processes, is also loud and clear. So thank you very much. Let us move on next to Rabia. Rabia, welcome once again. Many of us know that Yemen is a very dynamic and complex context, which is prone to volatility, and is also dependent on various internal but also external factors. You have been working with the Cash and Market Working Group of Yemen for more than a year now, and together with the CVA actors, you came across several challenges in relation to inflation. But you also, I'm aware that you also made significant efforts to overcome those collectively. So please take us through your experiences from the Cash and Market Group.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgios, for getting into the discussion for Yemen. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. First of all, I would like to thank the CALP team and the organizers for allowing this opportunity to the Yemen team to share their experience. As Georgios already mentioned, that the context of Yemen is a dynamic context, and this context actually poses a perfect amalgamate of interconnected issues. I have been working with the team for over a year now, and yes, it is true that each issue is a very major issue in itself. However, it is an issue which contributes to some other issues directly or indirectly. So everything in Yemen seems to be an interconnected web of various different issues. The major issues which we have been facing since a couple of years now include extremely dynamic and fluctuating exchange rates throughout the country, import restrictions, fuel shortages, everything impacting the market prices of key food and non-food commodities. Simultaneously, we all know that there were also additional situations that happened because of the COVID restrictions that were being imposed in the country. So everything contributed directly or indirectly in an adverse manner to the purchasing power of the beneficiaries. So for us, the tricky thing in the country was to strike a balance between policies from both authorities, because in Yemen, we have two different authorities working in the country. So we have to align our efforts with both the authorities, not to offend anyone, and still strike a balance which can ensure maximum possible assistance to the vulnerable communities. So the various issues which we identified and tried to address directly or indirectly, and we are still going on through these issues because these are still ongoing issues and we cannot address them in a year because the situation is still fragile. So various different issues which we identified were access issues, fuel shortages, exchange rates, and then also the financial service providers' capacities and liquidity issues. Another thing within the CVA community, which was highlighted at various forums, was different information systems being used by the CVA community, different identification tools for the beneficiaries, whether it's national ID, voter, election IDs, birth certificates, all of these actually contributed to various sets of issues, which identified the need for different activities to be taken up by the cash market working group. So when we identified all these issues as a team, as a group, what we did was we worked together and we saw how and what policy and programmatic decisions that we can do, or we can plan ahead so that we can contribute to address these issues at micro, meso, or macro level, and to what extent we can do that. The first thing which we agreed as a team was that we need to do continuous monitoring of exchange rates. So in the context of Yemen, we all know that there are three different regions. There's a central region, there is north and south, and the north and south are controlled by two different authorities. So because we have two different authorities and two different regions, we have two different parallel running exchange rates, which are very much different from each other. One side of the country is extremely volatile in terms of exchange rates. The local currency has depreciated a lot as compared to the US dollars, and which has definitely impacted on increase of commodity prices, but also decreasing the purchasing power, added to the situation from the COVID-19, where the markets were closed, where the access routes were closed, the borders were closed, the imports were closed, and there were also decreased livelihood opportunities for the people. So first thing we did was to do continuous monitoring of exchange rates. And then we used these monitoring through various different actors and factors, and then we collated, compared the trends of these informing the various CVA programming decisions. The next thing which we agreed upon to do was to set up some efforts to harmonize the survival minimum expenditure basket for the country so that we can set up corresponding transfer values for the regions. There were certain discussions whether we could have them as a single set of assistance package across the country, but because of the changing situation in north and south regions, we agreed to have two different transfer values, and every single decision was actually informed by various assessments and monitoring which we did at grassroots level. Then another thing which we did was for the FSP environment, what we did was there was a study funded by CALP that was jointly done by CALP and Cash Market Working Group Yemen, That was a joint study on FSP environment in the country, which has recently been published as well. Along with that, various different guidance notes and working papers have been developed on key issues which we identified and which were tabled during the situations. One of those talking about whether to use foreign currency for setting up the CVA assistance package or not. And these documents are live documents, but they also capture all those elements and concerns which people are quite hesitant to answer. Like, if we use foreign currency as a assistance package in Yemen, what impact, what political impact that may have on the country, what programmatic impact it can have on the country, what protection impact or what protection concerns we have for the beneficiaries if we do that, whether beneficiaries feel safe to travel. All of these points have been answered in that guidance note or document. Then there was a very comprehensive exercise which we conducted across the country, was to monitor the exchange rates, but not only monitor the exchange rates, but we also monitored the commodity prices, which includes both food and non-food commodities. And then we identified how these exchange rates are correlated with the markets. And then along with that, we also identified key commodities that are impacting or that are actually the ones who are having a hyperinflated prices in the market. So by doing this particular exercise, what we did was we identified the key commodities so that we can inform the respective clusters if they want to do some targeted sector specific interventions to support the communities. For example, among the food commodities, we saw that there was an increasing trend in the wheat flour in certain areas. And then in wash commodity list, we saw there was an absolute increase in the water trucking cost, which was hyperinflating the overall transfer values or the SMEP commodity cost. So all of these things were identified and then referred to the various different clusters. How we did it and what we plan to do for future so that we can keep on monitoring and we can keep on contributing and supporting the CVA community. The first thing we did was we kept everybody in loop. Lucky for us, the Cash Market Working Group Yemen was supported by all the donors. We were supported by other consortium, including the Cash Consortium Yemen. We were also supported by the UN Common Cash Statement in Yemen. Along with that, we were supported by the clusters as well. What we are planning to do is we are having some key discussions going on with the key actors to use inflation and economic analysis to predict anticipated exchange rates and commodity costs for a period of time so that we can use that information for contingency planning ahead of time for the CVA community. So this is some activity which is currently in discussion and we will be adopting it soon enough for Yemen. So I'm quite positive that this will also improve the CVA responses in the country. Then within the UNCCS Yemen, what we did was there was a hell lot of discussion about the interoperability of management information systems. So we did and when I say we, because in Yemen, we are lucky enough to have a very close collaboration among the UNCCS and the Cash Market Working Group. We talk to each other a lot and we are present in each other's meeting very closely. So that actually gave us a window, an avenue to talk and to take the Cash Market Working Group issues to the UNCCS forum so that we can see how we can benefit from both coordination platforms. So recently we did a study on interoperability of management information systems, and currently we are in discussion with the heads of agencies how to adapt and what way forward we can see in the country on that. Another thing which we did in the country was to improve the Cash Market Working Group work plan. We did identify issues, we did identify common and key activities for the Cash Working Group to do, but simultaneously we also worked with the Cash Market Working Group team, and we have aligned the Cash Market Working Group work plan with the Donor Working Group work plan activities contributing to the working group in Yemen, to the CVA environment in Yemen. But simultaneously, we have also identified key activities from the clusters, the CVA priorities from the clusters, and aligned all of them with the broader grand bargain commitment. So this is something which the Yemen team is quite passionate about, and we will see how the activities in Yemen can contribute to the broader global cash market environment and the grand bargain priorities and commitment. Another thing which also we plan to do is to have a broader strategic yet and operational linkages of an HCT cash strategy. So this activity will also capture the broader priorities in the region, in the country, but also talk to the grassroots priorities and activities which need to be done and how all of these are interconnected. So how the good practice review helped us in all these issues and in the Yemen activities. I'm quite pleased to share that what we see in the GPR report is that the approach or the recommendations that I've mentioned, these very much align with the Yemen environment, which we have adopted a lot. Working together, collaboration, anticipating various different risks, joint approaches towards common objectives, pre-setting triggers for expenditure baskets and transfer values, constant monitoring, but also another thing which I would like to mention is that the study itself also supports the idea that strong coordination and integrated approach also allows efficient and effective CVA programming, which is definitely beyond the geographical overlap. And this is something which we are also taking back to the current HRP process. And we are advocating that this year, when we move ahead with the HRP planning, the organizations and the clusters should also work together with common objectives and have integrated a program design to be eligible for the HRP funding and things like that. These are also under discussion, and we are taking these approaches and recommendations forward to broader platforms.
Thank you, Rabia. Again, I love the emphasis you put on the cash working group active role on when dealing with programmatic adaptations. And also the need from thorough analysis from the onset on all response. And also I am aware of the actors' collective efforts to create programs that are ready to adapt and being resilient. So thank you very much. Last but not least, I will invite Mulugeda to give us an overview of the current situation in Afghanistan, a country that we all know has been in a state of protracted crisis now for over 40 years, with recent changes in control of the country being converged into deeply rooted poverty and natural disasters. So Mulu, welcome once again. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yorgos. Thank you, Rabia. I am very cognizant of the time, so I'm going to be very brief on this. I'm sure most of you are wondering why Afghanistan is not part of the case study, and there's no such inflation, hyperinflation yet. And the answer is, well, looking at the context, the current situation, things are not looking up great in Afghanistan, and we might be heading to the same experience that the countries are in the case study. So the GPR report is timely for us in Afghanistan and for a lot of agencies, CVA actors who are planning to do. Now, as Georgios mentioned early, Afghanistan is a classic humanitarian situation, which is at the moment have an impact of the triple C effect, which is the protracted conflict, climate, which is prolonged drought, as well as the COVID. Not only that, since August 15, a lot of situations have changed where the new administration is in place. And at this point in time, the economy is at a free fall. So what are the situations that are contributing to the current economic situation and humanitarian crisis? So I just want to jump onto very quick figures that would help us to paint a picture. Now, the major ones are the macroeconomic situation. So after the fall of Kabul, taken over by the new administration August 15, major international donors cut the funding for the country. Remember that before the fall of Kabul, 40% of Afghanistan's budget is supported by donors. So now that is cut or suspended. And then, of course, then that followed as well as the freezing of the Afghanistan's central bank foreign reserve money, which is worth of $9 billion. So that again cut as well. The third point is that the international financial institutions, i.e. World Bank and IMF, also suspended the loan that was normally provided for Afghanistan. Then, of course, that the effect of all this, the situation, as I said, not looking great. And then now the prediction is that the economy is expected to contract almost by 20%, which pushing a lot of population into further poverty, right? Now, with all this, of course, that what comes is the extreme shortage of cash liquidity. So there was given that all suspension or cutting off those aid and everything. Keep in mind that is also an economy that was grappled with a protracted crisis, and there is no enough cash to go around, if you will, by the banking sector, right? So to control that, the central bank sort of put the withdrawal limit, putting maximum $200 per week, and then recently they've changed it, revised the withdrawal up to 25%, 25,000 per month. So now, overall, the banking sector is struggling with liquidity crisis, contributing a devaluation of Afghani, which is the local currency, against the major currencies, especially US dollar. So that is causing a huge economic shock. Now, what policy or programmatic decision have been made under the current situation? So the Afghanistan Cash and Vouchers Working Group is one of the active cash and vouchers working group, which comprises over 50 plus agencies with cash and vouchers, actors, donors, private sectors, and all. So it is one of really active as well. And then what we are doing is since the situation, the main event in August 15, all the cash and vouchers actors at the moment doing the following things. A, reassessing the feasibility of cash and vouchers as a humanitarian response modality. So the cash and vouchers used to be widely used before the situation. Now, we are sort of, as a group, we are reassessing, is cash and vouchers the right modality at this point in time, given this is rapidly changing economic and political landscape. The other thing is that modality shift. Some agencies are already shifting the response modality, moving more into the mixed modality approach, trying cash in urban and semi-urban areas like in Kabul, doing a bit of cash and vouchers, whereas increasing, of course, the in-kind assistance in the deep field areas and in the remoter areas where they are not well connected. And of course, given in this kind of situation, you would need more information on market performance. So we are closely following the price trend of goods and services, which is supported by excellent work by World Food Program, which the VAM team is doing market price monitoring across the country on a weekly basis. Whereas the REACH, which is the REACH initiative, which is part of the cash and voucher working group in Afghanistan, they have just finalized part of what they call the whole of Afghanistan study. So they have been doing that, and that information is coming to the cash and vouchers working group to make any adjustment in terms of response. Now, another point is, which is to mention, is that the IRC as an agency is coordinating cash and vouchers working group, planning to undertake the banking options study, looking at the financial service providers in the country, what it looks like. So that is where we are looking at. The result of that finding would help us, the community of cash and vouchers working group, to make the informed decision for this situation. Now, how could have, and then will the GPR analysis report making this decision? As I said earlier, I think this is a perfect time for us in Afghanistan, for the wider cash and voucher community, that it would help us to adjust, okay, what are the lessons we can take from the case of Lebanon, case of Zimbabwe, or case of Yemen, and case of South Sudan, all those countries where the case studies is that. So following that route, the Cash and Vouchers Working Group developed a guidance note, an interim guidance note in the current economic and political landscape, looking at different scenarios. So looking at 3 different scenarios. So the scenario 1 looks at if the current cash liquidity issue improves while the market price trend continues in a better way, of course, we can scale up the Cash and Vouchers Working Group, Cash and Voucher response, which is an optimistic scenario. But scenario 2 is if the current market situation with a small price increase continues while the cash crisis or the cash liquidity crisis persists, what are the ways we can change? So in this situation, we recommended that agencies could consider a cash or voucher or commodity voucher or value voucher approach, particularly in urban and semi-urban areas where you have traders who are willing to take the risk of exchange rate, right? So that is scenario 2. Scenario 3, if the market prices situation skyrockets while the cash liquidity situation goes completely off, where inflation goes up, what you could do is cash and vouchers will not be an appropriate response modality. So this is the third modality or the third scenario. We put it together to the Cash and Vouchers Working Group on this. Again, as I said, these are the activities that we are collectively doing in a Cash and Vouchers Working Group in Afghanistan. Given this is a transitory period, it is a rapidly evolving situation. We are monitoring every step and every outlook that is potential ramification for cash and voucher operations in Afghanistan. Now, there are also other issues that we are discussing at this point in time. Even before the current situation, the banking sector in Afghanistan is not well developed. So you've got the Hawala system, which has been providing particularly the cash for as an FSP, right? So the Hawala system in Afghanistan is a bit different than in other countries because it is centrally controlled by the Central Bank of Afghanistan. So at this point in time, they're still providing a source of sort of cash for the humanitarian actors, including for payment of their staff and even those actors who are already doing small cash. We are using that system. But what if all these 50 plus agencies move back to cash? How we are going to avoid that competition for the limited amount of money in the market? So we are talking about how we can do joint procurement of FSPs, especially with Hawalas, how we can avoid the competition so that one agency is not paying large amount of transaction fee compared to the others. How we can sort of also do sort of an advocacy with the central bank where these situations are addressed. So I think these are also elements we are talking. We are also discussing about the communication for donors. Now, because the transaction fee is increasing and because agencies are paying more money, we are going to pay more money for the Hawalas. How donors can help us giving a flexible funding. If an agency is going to move back or switch a modality, how donors can help us to make that time, not just necessarily to earmark, but flexible funding for actors to monitor, given this is a rapidly changing fluid situation, how they can work on this one. So these are key elements that we are discussing at this point in time. Again, as I said, this is a rapidly evolving situation, rapidly changing situation. Things can change at any time. Even the scenarios that we put together might not work. But I think the key point, which I want to reiterate, is that in times such as this, it is all about coordination. It is all about coordination among different actors. We are not going to create sort of a war of competition among all different actors. I think we need to stick to the basics and also the commitment that we have under the grand bargain commitment, where the principle and the pragmatic coordination need to come in play. and working together. And this is where we are looking. But another point is that, as I said, we are also setting up a lessons learned situation from actors who are doing cash in a context where sanctions are there, inflation is higher, cash liquidity is an issue. So we are also bringing different actors and experts to talk into this group and then discuss. Again, this document is very important for us and very timely for us. Actually, we had a chance to read it with my colleagues. This is already, the report is already shared or uploaded on the website where we have the cash and vouchers working group, where these actors would help and then would make an informed decision. I think this brought us a lot of teams together, brought more interaction than ever to work together and to avoid that competition for the same people we are serving. So I'm very cognizant of time again, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, Georgios, and then I will be happy to answer later. Over to you.
Thank you, dear Mulu. Your enthusiasm about strengthening coordination and collective action is quite clear to everyone, at least for me it is. And the teamwork that is needed how to respond in such difficult situation. Can I say that we don't have much time left, but we have, there have been 25 questions and 22 have been answered already. I have been into many learning events. There are not many occasions where you have so much active question and answer chatbots. What we will do for sure is that we'll make sure that we will compile everything, and while we'll be share the recording, we will share also the questions and answers. And this is also an indication that this is one more proof why this topic is so up to date, and the need also for CALP to take this topic and enable all of us to continue the discussions. So thank you for this engaging and very informative session. So for the wrap up, before we conclude this event, I would like to quickly ask our panelists some concluding remarks. So dear Corina, thank you once again. From your perspective as a major donor agency working in Zimbabwe, what would be your reflections on the use of the good practice review?
I think the practice review helps to systematize the whole discussion and to really go through the 3 steps that Isabel introduced from the start. She mentioned that learning and adjusting is a key element in such a volatile and moving context, and I can only subscribe to that. We've mentioned that it's important to seek technical advice from economists, but a key lesson from Zimbabwe is it's more than just an economic question. For example, the fact whether you have an ID card or you don't gives you access to the US dollar cash through Western Union. So there's a protection issue for people who don't have ID cards, for example. And that flexibility and that adjustment and readiness to learn also concerns us as donors. And my last recommendation is make it clear if you work as a donor in such a context, this is a shared problem. We are in this together. And obviously that is made easier in contexts where you don't have any terrorism financing constraints in your work. Thank you.
Clear. Thank you very much. Rabia, as a leader and advisor of a very active and operational cash working group, what would be your recommendations to colleagues on the review?
Well, for me, what I would recommend is that this particular document actually provides a whole arena of various experiences which can be leveraged for the success stories, and we can see how these situations can be adapted to various different contexts. Like if I tell for Yemen, I would go to the document and see what worked in other contexts and how that successful approach can be adapted for my own context, which is a very practical work to go through. So this is what I would say that the GPR contributes to the context for Yemen in practical terms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabia. And finally, Mulu, again, as a leader and chair of a cash working group dealing with such a difficult response, what would you recommend to all our colleagues on this use of good practice review?
Thank you so much, Yorgos. I think I touched on it earlier as well. I think there is no perfect playbook on how to do CVA in a rapidly changing context, right? So I think this calls for good programming, flexible planning, and continue to learning and coordination. I think these are the key words. I think you might not only go with one scenario. It might backfire you, it might change. So I think it is just flexible planning. I think it's just continue learning as well, like learning and adaptation are, I think, important on this time. I think these opportunities, these kind of situations would also bring some new learning and new opportunities, how we can capitalize. But of course, another thing is that conduct more of a detailed study looking at, what are the different banking options out there? Is that only formal banking we are thinking or new banking options? What are the blockages out there and opportunities, and then how we can bring these elements to as an emerging solution for a crisis that looks bigger, but I think we can overcome. So these are the elements. But of course, coordination, and coordination, that is the key. Over.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Because my screen just broke. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. A big thanks to all the panelists. I could see the energy, and I mean, from both the audience and the panelists. From CALP's side, just very quickly, dear everyone, CALP will continue to support the efforts to increase knowledge and understanding on this topic. By first, we have created a special section on our website so that all relevant pieces of work can be uploaded and concentrated on one page. But also we will continue to encourage, like we always do, actors to upload their resources that are related to this topic. In parallel, we will work together with different cash working groups so we can encourage that these case studies are being replicated in the same format. And last but not least, we will continue. We hope that we will be able to update the current review on a yearly basis, subject, of course, to the availability of resources. So with that being said, I kindly ask Isabel to have a closing word on behalf of the DCF. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Yorgos, and thanks all. It's the overarching theme that I'm taking away from the panelists is the importance of coordination, and this really has been a true coordinated effort to get to this stage, showing the value of the CALP network and of donor coordination. And I think the interest in today's webinar has also highlighted the importance of this work and of continuous learning. So, so this is just a plea to all of us to reflect on our responsibilities in taking this forward and challenging the status quo, to use Najat's wording. So please continue sharing your experiences and using the CALP platforms, the D groups, and all sorts of forums so that we can keep doing better for those we serve. Thank you.
Excellent. So we have reached now to the end of this event. I hope you have benefited from this session, and I hope that the good practice review and the case studies will be of good use to many of you, including me. So many thanks to everyone that has contributed in creating and putting this initiative forward. So thanks again, and have a good rest of the day to everyone. Bye.